Religious experience, altered states, grace, numinous experience, God's calling, ecstasy, spiritual awakenings, transcendence, realization, breakthrough, ecstatic wonder. What a remarkable list, isn't it? They're different from one another. If you've had such an experience, it was life-changing, of course. I had such an experience. I was a young man in Vienna, and I was watching a play, just like you. Suddenly, I realized that I am absolutely safe. Yes, absolutely safe, whatever happened to me. Strange, yes? It changed me. It did. I think perhaps half of you had had your own such experience, one that you revered and still revere. The other half of you may think such events are a delusion, a hallucination, the theater of the mind's joke, and that science will soon lower the curtain on such imaginings. Well, theater is the place to explore such a dispute. Shall we? Let's raise the curtain. It's 1939, and I'm in the reading room of the British Museum. What about your revelation? Are you recalling it?
Professor Wittgenstein.
Hello? Who are you?
Excuse me, Professor Wittgenstein. Perhaps you may recognize me.
Why should I recognize you? Have we met?
No, we haven't, but you do know me. You've lectured concerning my theories. Indeed, you may recognize me from photographs in my books.
You're Sigmund Freud, aren't you? What are you doing here, Dr. Freud?
A mutual friend revealed that you had a dream in which I played a role. I couldn't resist seeking you out. Also, an excuse to meet you. I was told that if I couldn't find you at Cambridge, you sometimes study here.
So you thought you could just barge in on me, Doctor, is that it?
Please, don't take offense. I'll leave if you wish.
No. I don't mean to be rude, it's just... You took me by surprise. Also, I am amazed that my friend passed on that private disclosure to you, although perhaps I shouldn't be. He has such a loose tongue.
So, Professor, perhaps this encounter is not unwanted after all?
Already examining my motives, are you, Doctor? I'm uncomfortable, but I have to admit that there's some truth to what you say. I can see that a part of me wanted to explore the dream.
And who better to explore it with than me, eh, Professor?
Of course, but I'm still surprised you sought me out.
I have another reason. It was your sister, Marguerite, whose intervention with the authorities last year secured my safe departure from Austria. I want to express my gratitude.
Your gratitude is unnecessary, Doctor. I am honored by your visit. This just moved so fast. I need to catch my breath.
I have to catch my breath as well. I was just in Cambridge trying to find you. I'd never been there, but many of the students recognized me. I was told you are regarded almost as a deity.
Please.
Yes, I was told that when you returned to Cambridge in 1929, John Maynard Keynes wrote his wife, "Well, God has arrived. I met him on the 5:15 train."
It's amusing that he was celebrating me at the time I was rejecting the ideas of the only book I ever published.
You have long been the object of others' fascination. A number of your Cambridge colleagues have come to me for psychoanalysis. I've heard a lot about you.
Some of them share gossip about you as well. Gossip is the lifeblood there. I avoid Cambridge life as much as possible.
Cambridge life is, shall I say, rather spicy. As I said, I had never been there, but the stories I've heard.
Well, I hope you enjoy such titillation. I find life there stifling.
So, you avoid life there. A student told me that I might find you at Guy's Hospital here in London. He said you intended to volunteer at the hospital if war breaks out. Volunteer as a porter. More entertaining company?
I'm not seeking entertainment. It's duty. I don't believe we are born on this earth to have a good time.
I was taken to your quarters at Trinity College. The door was open, and I looked in. I saw a camp bed and a couple deck chairs. Professor, you are an ascetic.
Doctor, are you analyzing me again?
Perhaps. I can't resist. Why was there black paper at the edges of the windows?
If you must know, the windows have the wrong proportions. I was trying to adjust how they look.
So a bit of obsessive perfectionism. I'll admit to the same, but I don't fix my window.
Well, perhaps we can look at some of your idiosyncrasies, Doctor.
I can't let go of this yet. Black paper around your windows. It suggests looking at the world through a dark frame, a pessimistic frame.
Don't play with me, Doctor. If you followed my life at all, you know I have suffered from episodes of hell-like darkness. Deep inside me, there's a perpetual seething. I keep hoping I can turn into a different person.
I'm sorry, Professor. I don't want to belittle your suffering. Let's turn to something more encouraging. I'm pleased, really, to have found you, but I interrupted you. What are you reading? Isn't that the Bible?
Yes. I'm looking at several translations of the Old Testament.
Scholarship? Religion?
Maybe both, but my focus is philosophy. I believe my philosophy has origins in the Old Testament. The Hebrews were concerned with the basis of morality, a concern I share. The Bible has a story to explain it. The story begins with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Everyone knows the story. They are innocents there in the garden.
Adam and Eve were much like the animals around them. They had sentience, but not humanness.
Humanness? They do end their innocence by eating forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
It may be bold of me, but the Bible needs amending. The Bible identifies the wrong tree. It was the tree of speech they ate from. Eating from that tree gave them the gift of speech. Having speech, they could create language. They could know one another, relate. Having language, they were no longer mindless brutes. They were human.
So, for you, language is the essential human trait. More, I think you're implying than having language, we also possess free will.
Yes, yes, Doctor. In a biblical sense, language is divine. God's realm operates within causal, predetermined paths. Having given us speech, God bestowed a divine power. Having speech, having language, we have created a realm that we, like gods, determine ourselves.
So you would say the stars must obey causality, but we do not. Still, to stay with the biblical text, don't Adam and Eve still need to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil to complete their humanity?
No. Having language, we create morality. Language itself is enough. Around the world, no matter what the people or their language is, moral understanding emerges.
I don't think the Bible is that confident that language itself leads to morality. What about Moses and the Ten Commandments?
Even Moses confirms these themes. Look at his departing words to the Hebrews. In Deuteronomy, as he nears death, Moses makes this radical statement. Obeying these commandments is not too difficult or beyond reach. These laws are not in the far heavens, that you have to send someone to ascend to the heavens to bring them down to you. Nor are these laws beyond the ocean, so that no one can bring you their message. No, they are very close at hand. They are in your mouths and in your hearts, so that you can obey them.
Well delivered, Professor, but I don't see Moses disavowing his role as the lawgiver.
Were you listening? Moses was witnessing that the people always knew the law. He was simply reminding them. At the very least, he was saying there is nothing alien in the commandments, nothing foreign about them.
I didn't expect to be drawn into biblical commentary. You don't believe these Bible stories literally, do you?
Like you, I'm not a religious person, but also, like you, I believe that these biblical stories convey profound truths.
Yes, but so far you've ignored my view that Moses was an Egyptian put to death by the Hebrews. I assume you've read my Moses and monotheism, but I'll put that aside. What is your point?
Before I share that with you, I want you to notice that, like me, you had no hesitation rewriting the biblical story.
True, Professor. Neither of us is shy about doing that, but what was your point?
My point has to do with the intent of this Moses story. Whoever put it into the Bible, whoever that was, the editor or redactor, was undermining Moses' importance.
Why would the editor or the redactor want to do that?
You know, given the strong roles given to the biblical matriarchs, the redactor could well have been a woman in King Solomon's court. She knew that our morality begins not with stone tablets at Sinai, but with exchanges at our mother's knees.
An agnostic woman.
She, let's say she, saw that morality wasn't pressed onto us, not by Moses, and though she didn't say it, perhaps not even by God. Moses, whatever his inspiration, can't convey something only he knows, something private to him. He has to speak it in familiar ways. At best, he can only elaborate language already understood, language that is already in his listeners' mouths and hearts.
You're belittling Moses' genius.
I'm not belittling Moses. It's about acknowledging that regarding morality, we don't need a foundational theory. Morality is already at home in our human practices and is embedded in our speech and actions.
Embedded.
Language immerses us, embeds us in morality. I've often said, words are deeds. As speakers, we are also actors. Speaking and acting are the inseparable stuff of human interaction. Morality arises out of that. Morality engages us, body and soul.
Body and soul. Professor, you're getting far too heady. I want to show you something. Before seeking you out in this alcove, I looked up some of my original work when I was a young laboratory anatomist. There's a folio here of my drawings of neurons. The importance of these drawings is still recognized today. I was the first to show that the nerve cells of all creatures, from the lowest invertebrates to ourselves, are the same. Indeed, looking back, I was probably the first to draw the neuron. Look, Professor.
Nice detail. I've heard about this. If you had grasped the significance of what you had drawn, you could have been credited as being the founder of neuroscience.
Don't minimize my achievement, Professor. I was the discoverer, the founder. I was the first.
Doctor, I think your discovery was a marvelous achievement. It's certainly one to be remembered.
Thank you. But, speaking of things to be remembered, I don't want to forget why I've sought you out. I want to hear the dream. I want to hear my role in it.
Very well, Doctor, but understand, I have questions for you too.
Of course, I will honor that. First, though, I have to acknowledge I am honored to meet you. You are perhaps the greatest mind I will have had the opportunity to analyze. It's well known what your mentor Bertrand Russell said of you. He described you as the most perfect example I have ever known of genius as traditionally conceived. Passionate, profound, intense, and dominating.
I dare say he was speaking of himself.
A nice deflection. Well, I was touched that you shared with a friend that you had dreamed about me. You and I are both Viennese. We've strolled the same streets, patronized the same cafes. We live here in England, but we are both exiles from that former treasured life. Learning that you had dreamed about me stimulated me. Even though you have written critical things regarding my work, I discovered I have an affection for you. It's a paternal affection, I think, given that I'm old enough to be your father. But now, I'm the loose-tongued one.
But your affection for me, tell me, is it narcissistic or anaclitic?
Are you teasing or mocking me? Yes, that is the distinction I make regarding relationships. I guess it's both, Professor. I do have a narcissistic identification with you. We're both regarded as geniuses, but there's something anaclitic too, leaning back to earlier relationships. I enjoy the sense of myself as a father figure in relation to you. I enjoy the prospect of an Oedipal struggle too.
I am having a bit of fun with you too, Doctor. I'm now looking forward to this. I examined my dreams, though, of course, just as an amateur. Indeed, it was Marguerite's entering psychoanalysis with you that made it a family parlor game. And I'll add, I look forward to struggling with you under whatever label.
Speaking of a struggle, there is a story circulating about you that I'd like your reaction to. It's said that when Karl Popper visited to give a talk, you threatened him with a poker.
I threatened him? It's a false accusation, Doctor. I didn't threaten him at all. The Cambridge Philosophy Club was held in a cold room. I was stoking the fire at the moment. The poker was in my hand as I made a point. He then asked me if I was going to strike him. I hated that, but hitting him was unthinkable. How could he imagine that of me?
You're getting so wound up, Professor. You know Popper was just making a joke about you threatening him. You're so literal. You couldn't take it. You had to stalk out and slam the door.
I was insulted. What should I have done? If you want to compare responses, let's include yours to your young protege, Carl Jung. When he finally mounted the courage to disagree with you, you fainted. You couldn't take it.
I don't want to get off on the wrong foot with you, Professor. I confess I'm competitive.
No offense taken.
Good. But to move on, let's acknowledge another struggle. The struggles within you. I know you're a tortured soul, someone given to depression and self-loathing.
Of course, I don't deny it. I have often been desperate and close to suicide. You know, 3 of my brothers committed suicide.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. What a burden it must be for you. I assume you relate your own suicidal impulses to their suicides.
I do. I remember our sitting before our Father. Doctor, ironically, you are anticipating my dream. The dream is strange in that almost all of it actually happened. Still, it's a nightmare. It begins at our family table. In the dream, you, Doctor,
You boys aren't like me. When I was your age, I was out on the street playing the violin for toy people's indifference or their smug coin tosses. You boys are panty waists. None of you show the signs of manly leadership. Ludwig here spends his time making a sewing machine for his mother. I don't know why I let your mother provide you with governesses and tutored home education. You should probably be in public schools, learning about real life. Who is your chauffeur rebuffing?
Adolf Hitler. My father prevailed and I was sent to a public school. Hitler was a student there at the same time. I never spoke to him.
So, Adolf Hitler, your classmate, tries to sell you a painting and you ignore him. You know, in Mein Kampf, he wrote that it was a Jew boy in his school that cemented his hatred of Jews. You started the Jewish persecution. We can only guess what fate Hitler plans for us Jews.
Oh, let me be. I had nothing to do with that.
You were a war hero.
I was loyal to my country. During World War I volunteered. I served as a scout at the front lines. I received the highest award for bravery.
I don't know if I should address you as Professor Bertrand Russell or as Russell, my mentor and friend. I'm now afraid that it might be very difficult for me to reach any understanding with you. And the small remaining hope, the Tractatus, my manuscript, might mean something to you has completely vanished. The Tractatus is my life's work. Now, more than ever, I am burning to see it in print. And on the other hand, it's galling to think that no one will understand it, even if it does get printed. It's true. I pulled your daughter's hair. I know I am an impatient teacher, and you are very kind to let me teach here, even though I'm a city dweller. I tried to be a good math teacher. Please, please forgive me.
How can you have proposed marriage, Ludwig? I've liked you, enjoyed kissing you, but I've never loved you. You're Jewish, and worse, you want a sexless, childless marriage. I'm no nun.
So nice to see you again, Wittgenstein. Bertie is so delighted that you have returned to Cambridge. The doors are always open to you here, but he tells me you avoid our gatherings. I love the social life here.
Are you being honest, Lady Adeline? Do you really love it?
To be frank, Wittgenstein, sometimes it's a bore, but I don't feel I always have to display my real feelings, do you?
Of course I do. I think one must be protective of one's ethics. To be always honest is to be ethical.
You've got to be kidding.
Not at all. And if that's your attitude, I don't think that we can be friends.
You insult Lady Ottoline. You've destroyed my ability to do philosophy. All you know how to do is insult and destroy. You are detestable, Wittgenstein. I'm going to destroy you.
Don't blame yourself, Russell. I've had a good life. I'll be all right.
So that's the dream. It's very rich. I'm breathless at my role. You say most of it is literal, but as you can see, I have no bleeding heart in my hand.
I'm glad you intend me no harm. This sharing will make me more alive and awake. I fear that mostly I'm asleep. You know, life is like a dream, often a bad dream, but sometimes I wake up just enough to realize that I have been dreaming.
Professor, my talent is the interpretation of dreams. My insights have broken through the hazy consciousness of our time, given it a new sharpness and clarity.
I recognize your importance. In my own writing, I've compared your influence to that of Copernicus and Darwin. Of course, I'm not alone in estimating your greatness. Maynard Keynes, you may know him personally, praises you.
I've never met him. However, I have read about his use of my theories.
Well, he's written that you are one of the great innovating geniuses of our age. He adds that you are a sort of devil, a disturber of the peace of the world whom we have to take seriously. And like Keynes, I've been concerned with you as an innovating devil too.
You're twisting my tail, Professor. There's some personal anger at me. It's in your dream too. What is it?
We'll get into it, but I'll start with this. You have no way of knowing it, but I foolishly lost 2 precious years of my friendship with Frank Ramsey over a spat about his defense of your theories. Then, when he was only 26, he died of an illness unexpectedly.
I can understand that anger, Professor, but it's displacement. I didn't poison your relationship with Ramsey. But tell me, was it Ramsey whose shoulder you were embracing in the dream when you were rejected?
Yes, it was Ramsey.
He was more than a friend, wasn't he?
Briefly. We were always quarreling, but I did love him.
There's a theme there, Professor. Aside from your sexuality, you are often rude and harsh with others. I know the law that even those friends who love you also fear you.
I never want to be bound by conventionality. I want to trust my impulses. Being candid is an imperative. But I must confess it has been destructive sometimes.
I think we can find the grounds for that motive in your dream. Let's examine your dream, shall we?
Yes, but being candid, as I said, my anger at you is deeper than the Ramsey matter. I fear your theories. Mostly, I fear the culture they represent.
I'm ready to examine that with you. It emerges at the end of your dream. Can we start at your dream's beginning?
First, an admission. Just a few days ago, when writing in my notebook, I had a thought about psychoanalysis. I wrote that having oneself psychoanalyzed is like eating from the tree of knowledge. Eating the fruit of such analysis, one devours one's innocence. In that loss, what redemption is gained? Let's begin, but I begin with that doubt.
Maturity begins with the loss of innocence. You can have that doubt, Professor, but doubt won't hinder insight. First, let's observe what kind of dream you had. It's the dream of an obsessive-compulsive, dealing with traumatic life events. Reenacting these events in the dream is an attempt to retrospectively master the original traumas.
Please, can you stay with the dream itself?
All right. The dream begins with your father ridiculing you and your brothers as weaklings.
I think all of us swallowed that shame. For one of my brothers, the one who was an officer in the Great War, it forecast his ultimate humiliation. He committed suicide after his soldiers in his command ignored his orders. Not manly enough to lead men, just like our father predicted.
So, all of you carried that self-contempt. All of you, I would say, suffered an Oedipal defeat. The Oedipal theme couldn't be clearer. Your making a sewing machine for your mother represents your wish to be her intimate, to supplant your father. He sees this and then crushes you with his disdain. I think for you, the reaction is a compulsive neurosis. It manifests itself in perfectionism, moralism. Worse, you wrestle with the demon of self-contempt.
I've never liked your Oedipus theory.
Oh, please hold off your theoretical objections for now, Professor. If it helps, I'll stay with the more patent elements of the dream. Note that much of your dream focuses on your guilt. Let's turn to the next scene. It has several layers. There's the indication of your wealthy origins and its ostentation. A chauffeur. I see the implied guilt about that. There's the young Adolf Hitler. I could say a lot about Hitler as an Oedipal figure, but let's stay with the more obvious. Here he's the victim of your snobbery. You are the persecutor of the child who, as a man, will be history's greatest persecutor. There's irony there, and also a perverted grandiosity. You are the author of your own people's destruction. You are Moses in reverse.
I feel neither grandiose nor guilty. I am struck by the coincidence of Hitler and me being in school together, but that's it. I had no obligation to buy his painting. I don't know why that was in the dream.
Let's go on to the next scene. Now, you have served in the Austrian army and are being awarded with perhaps the highest medal for bravery the army can bestow. The Austrian army, no less. If you had a taste for being a soldier, why didn't you join the British army? You'd been living in England.
I'm an Austrian, like you, Doctor. As an Austrian, I saw my duty to serve my country. I volunteered to be a scout. I had no taste for being a soldier.
For someone with no taste for being a soldier, your behavior was incredible. As a Wittgenstein, a scion of riches, you could have enjoyed a fine and comfortable rank, but instead, you volunteered to be a mere foot soldier. And not only that, you volunteered for a frontline position. What was it? Glory? Excitement? Maybe martyrdom?
That's a facile psychoanalysis, Doctor. I was writing my book, the Tractatus. I needed to be alone so I could think. Out there, alone, scouting trenches afforded me that solitude.
Let's look at your behavior analytically. Why are you serving in an army? Your mentor, Bertrand Russell, is an anti-war pacifist. Moreover, you chose the army that was fighting his country. And why is the son of the richest man in Austria volunteering as a foot soldier? What's the sense of it? You call it loyalty. Really?
I volunteered as a foot soldier because it would have been morally wrong to exploit my family's wealth. My father was the mogul of Austria's iron and steel industry. We were obscenely wealthy. How could I take advantage of that?
You're belittling some obvious dynamics. You were betraying both of your father figures. You were mocking both Russell's pacifism and your father's social positions, cloaking both betrayals with moral pretensions.
That's an ugly accusation.
It's not an accusation. It's an interpretation. You were driven by unconscious motives. I agree. It was not your intent to betray these fathers. Moreover, your volunteering to be a mere foot soldier, cannon fodder, suggests you had an underlying guilt for what you had done. You were seeking an atonement that was likely injury or death.
It looks to me that the real mockery here is the mockery of me. What seizes me more, though, is your use of the word driven. I'm putting that on the agenda for the theoretical exchange you promised for later.
Good. Well, let's move on then. In the dream, you're holding two books, the Tractatus that you published after the war, and Tolstoy's Gospel in Brief.
Yes. I was writing the Tractatus while in the trenches at the front. I was also reading Tolstoy's Gospel. I was inspired by his characterization of Jesus. It was a spiritual awakening for me. It's what led me to give up my inheritance after the war.
You surrendered a fabulous inheritance in order to live more like Jesus. Again, I would say what looks to be a saintly, shall we add, grandiose act really conceals another motive. I think that for you, keeping the money would have meant accepting your anointment as your father's scion. You spit on his gift, and in doing so severed your relationship with him. Again, though, none of this was your conscious intent.
I'm wondering if I should have agreed to this analysis. This is hard, Doctor.
I recognize that it's difficult to look at the tragedy of your relation to your father figures. In the next scene, you reveal your desperation whether the Tractatus will ever be published, and your despair whether your mentor then, Russell, has any appreciation of your writing.
Yeah, it was a crushing experience.
Let's go on. The next scene has you pleading for forgiveness from some parent.
Yes. After the war, instead of returning to Cambridge, I chose to be an elementary school teacher in a remote rural village in Austria. I did some good. I wrote a 40-page pronunciation and spelling dictionary for the children. I also learned the importance of asking questions rather than telling. In fact, in the book on philosophy I'm writing now, I ask, at last count, over 700 questions. And for the 100 or so for which I offer answers, I show my disagreement with most of those.
Well, let's not stray too far from the dream. In the dream, your plea to the parent did not go well.
I still find it humiliating to recall it. I was an impatient teacher. I struck one boy so hard he fell unconscious. I was thrown out. I went back years later and I tried to apologize to some parents, but they slammed their doors in on me.
The one child was a surrogate for you, a bad boy who deserves punishment and rejection. That's certainly the theme of the next dream scene. You pursue a futile quest for a woman's hand. Plainly, you wanted to escape your homosexuality, even as you embraced. Even though homosexuality is accepted among the Cambridge elite, you couldn't erase the shame you felt. It's possible that this is the issue most central to your lifelong bouts with depression.
I try not to think about my homosexuality. Aside from lovers, you're probably the only person with whom I've ever talked about it. I believe it's related to my Jewish blood.
Oh, yes. I don't want to overlook that connection. As a young man, you were under the influence of that wild writer, Otto Weininger. I knew him in Vienna. He tried to steal some of my ideas regarding bisexuality. He believed that Jewish men, he was himself a Jew and a homosexual, were not just bisexual, they were, I remember his words, Jews are more saturated with femininity than the Aryan, to such an extent that the most manly Jew is more feminine than the least manly Aryan. He committed suicide. It was his solution, committed grandiosely in Beethoven's apartment, no less.
He remains an influence on me, a morbid influence, I guess. Still, it's hard for me to shake his view that we Jews, being inferior, cannot be truly creative. You may share that prejudice, Doctor. Look, even the Moses you wrote of wasn't a Jew. He was an Egyptian aristocrat.
Don't ignore the creativity of the author of that theory.
I acknowledge that you, certainly more than myself, are evidence that perhaps Weininger was wrong.
Only perhaps, Professor? Until the Anschluss in Vienna, we Jews dominated the sciences and professions. I'm inclined to believe we Jews have a superior inheritance. Actually, I'm amused to hear talk of inferiority from someone with an aristocratic high German accent. An accent, I should say, quite superior to my common Austrian Viennese.
I can't help having the accent in which I was reared. Weininger would only argue that my accent does not uplift me.
Yes, Weininger. Weininger is a perfect example of the profound grip of castration anxiety. The Oedipal boy who is severely psychically punished can only survive by internalizing the contempt he has experienced. He seeks to escape by identifying with his punisher. I'm glad you never went as far as Weininger.
Thank you for that consolation, but you're piling the theory on me again.
Sorry. I don't want to linger on it, but your memory of your encounter with Lady Otto, and we are talking about a dream of actual memories, shows how harsh your superego is. It shows the depth of your attempt to escape moral judgment. Your conscience believes that only radical honesty will protect you from that judgment.
I strive for humility.
It's a kind of perverse attempt at saintliness.
I wish I were saintly. It's impossible. I struggle with vanity.
You do have that problem. I have that problem as well. It's part of the baggage of being hailed as a genius. Still, we cannot avoid exploring it in all its manifestations and depths. I know many relevant details about you.
I'm beginning to realize how fully you have followed my career.
Let's not avoid the issue of vanity. As I recall, you proposed to your mentor at Cambridge, G.E. Moore, that he submit your treatise on logic as the basis for a degree. When he replied that the treatise didn't fit the standard credentials, you wrote him an insulting letter. The two of you didn't speak for years. Ramsay is not the only person you have cut off like that.
I hated that Moore submitted to bureaucratic mentality. We later made up. At the time, I thought his behavior a kind of sin.
How about the sin of hubris? I believe you claimed that your celebrated book, the Tractatus, finished Western philosophy, correct?
Perhaps there was some hubris there. Claiming I was bringing Western philosophy to an end was bold, I'll admit. Believe it or not, it partly came from my desire to bring a business-like practicality to philosophy, an impulse I got from my father. The father, you say, I rejected.
From your father?
Yes. When he was a young man, he traveled to the United States. He waited on tables and played the violin at restaurants to support himself. He loved America. He often repeated that America taught him to be enterprising. It taught him the importance of doing a job well and to completion. So,
the great philosopher thought himself simply a journeyman as he finished off Western philosophy. I'm joking, of course. You are a great philosopher.
Thank you. Even one of my severest critics at Cambridge said that not granting me a professorship there would be like denying Einstein a chair in physics. However, regardless of my critics, I was never afraid of being isolated, either personally or professionally.
I know your love of isolation, that hut in the remote fjords of Norway, your philosophical retreat. Well, if you weren't playing Jesus there, you were certainly imitating the recluses who were his disciples after his death. I'm told you fed birds from your outstretched hands. More a St. Francis pose, then.
You're being cynical about my values, tender and meaningful to me. I feel very judged, even castrated by your analysis. How is this brutal experience a therapy? Your patient's real disorder is masochism. They actually pay you to endure this day after day and for years?
I've been giving you the gift of recognition, Professor. Who has ever entered your private hell with you, as I have? None of my words could ever punish you as much as you punish yourself. I've given you some release from that bondage. That's a release from masochism.
If you say so. I certainly doubt experiencing it yet, and I doubt I will.
If I can return for a moment to the dream, I want to return to the final scene where Russell murders you. You not only seem to forgive him, you reassure him that you will be all right. I could certainly read it as an Oedipal appeasement, but I think there's something more going on.
There is. One evening, when I was attending a theater performance in Vienna, I suddenly had the epiphany that I am absolutely safe. At that moment, I knew that whatever would befall me, whether danger or even death, I am, in some profound sense, safe. I can't say that I can always hold on to that realization, but it is a consolation for me. I can't say more about it than that.
Well, I can. It sounds to me much like what I've called oceanic feeling. It's a psychological projection. Your repressed wish for immortality drives that desire into consciousness as an overwhelming feeling. In your case, as I just said, there is also the drive to both defy the father figure and appease him by accepting his wrath.
I think it's my turn. You've missed something.
What?
It was you, Doctor, who played those male roles in my dream. You who seized my heart and killed me. Your belittlement of my spiritual experience just now exemplifies why you have that role.
What do you mean?
I think of all the challenges to my motivation you have expressed, this last one is the hardest. You tear at the heart of my spiritual life. You know, perhaps it was a mistake to admit you here, Doctor. Perhaps you should leave.
I'm profoundly sorry, Professor. I apologize. I am being candid. Isn't that what you value? I had no intent to insult you. Please forgive me.
You insult my inner life, my spiritual life, the brazenness of it.
Again, I apologize. I know I have much to learn from you, Professor. Let me stay. We will exchange ideas. It means a great deal to me.
Very well. I do want to show you how mistaken you are. I do want you to see how mechanistic your theoretical attitude is.
Professor, I want to explore that with you. But first, I want you to see that I am offering you a gift, a therapeutic gift.
How is your analysis a gift?
I'm offering you another view of your motivations, another dimension, if you will, an insight which can enlarge your freedom, release you from suffering.
What insight?
I've given you a new standpoint from which you can examine your behavior. If, as I'm suggesting, you see how your relationship with your father has governed much of your behavior, it cannot no longer have the hold on you it does. You can be released from its neurotic grip.
What behavior do you have in mind?
Take, for example, your inflexible social truth-telling. It alienates you from others.
I have my standards, my convictions. Are you saying I should conform to some social norm? Did the Moses you admire engrave some such rule?
Of course not. But don't we strive as humans for some universal codes of behavior?
Not at all. I believe we are all bound to our own convictions. I examine my convictions, but truthfully. I don't dig too far and don't expect differently from others. I stop digging when I reach my personal bedrock. As I often say, I turn my spade.
So, you see yourself as a defending gardener, as you cast me, going back to your earlier remark, as some kind of mechanic. What do you mean, saying my thought was mechanistic?
I'll explain, but we're weaving past each other. I want to acknowledge that you have offered your analytic insights as a gift. You want to heal my suffering. I will certainly ponder what you said. But I want to suspend that to answer your question. Your psychoanalytic interpretations describe motives as machine-like. A machine produces a series of connected actions. From start to finish, each action causes the next to change. Your description of motivation is like that. Behind every motive is another motive driving it. What could be more mechanistic than a chain of drives?
There's no escaping such an analysis. You can call it mechanistic if you like, but there's no escaping that everything we do is determined by a process.
So if everything we do is determined, where's the allowance for human freedom?
Is this some kind of philosopher's trick move? We live in a material, physical world. Everything is the result of a process. Your knee moves because some neuron fired.
You've evaded my question.
My research has focused on neuroses. As regards neuroses, there are hidden motives. As regards ordinary motivation, perhaps the dynamic is different, more voluntary. Does that satisfy you?
No, it doesn't. I don't accept your account regarding neuroses, and that includes your claim that you're doing science.
Oh, yes. I've read you have strong objections to my theories regarding science.
Oh, don't mistake my attitude regarding science. Science has made dazzling achievements. I don't oppose science, but I do see myself as an exile from the world we came from. I reject the major movements of this era, namely socialism, fascism, and the adoration of science.
Well, of course. But for fascism, you and I might be enjoying this conversation in Vienna over a Linsertorte at the Prückel Café. I miss those cafes and the intellectual culture, Professor. But we are now in a new era with its own cultural possibilities.
In art? Music? What? Has anything advanced since Beethoven and Brahms? Technology has displaced culture. Is a triumph of the instrumental over being and sensibility. I see nothing but decline.
Don't idealize the past.
Don't we have to be protective of what it means to be human? I fear the tyrannies of quantity over quality, the subordination of the human spirit to the zeal for numbers and facts.
Look, your friend, Maynard Keynes, argues that my insights could rescue humanity. My insights could rescue us from the rigidities of your beloved culture and from the disaster of societies collapsing as a result.
What possible connection can he make?
He turns to my theories. What's preventing recovery from the Great Depression? Keynes says it's the cultural virtues of thrift, hoarding, and miserliness. It's the culture's rigid superego, a superego that insists on postponement of pleasure, on austerity.
That sounds simplistic to me.
He goes further. He says that the conservatives' policy to hold to the gold standard is a regression to infantile anal fixation. Gold for them is eroticized feces.
I don't know whether to smirk or sigh. I do know that Keynes is not alone in adopting your theories. Your theories are on the tongue of every person I know.
Are you accusing me of being a fashion?
Both a fashion and a plague. Truly, you have transformed how we speak, some of it for the worse. But I will concede, some of it for the better.
Some for the better. For example, please.
I am genuinely impressed by some of your insights. You know, I share your view that anxiety can lead us to return to more juvenile behavior. Regression, you call it. I'm sure that's a useful insight. But I must add, your terms, fixation, defense mechanism, they imply a false scientific precision, as gold as feces.
I don't want to defend Keynes' use of my theories, Professor.
Indeed. But let's talk about infantile fixations, as you call them. I am appalled at your concept of infants' polymorphous perversity, as you call it. The idea that infants' innocent pleasure in their mouths and sex parts is akin to disease, a perversity having multiple forms. I'm sorry, not multiple, the more fancy word, polymorphous. Polymorphous perversity?
Your first phrase was on the mark, akin to disease. If an adult had the same involvement in his body functions, it would be perverse.
Making the comparison, adult to infant, is what is perverse, Doctor.
You miss the larger issue. I dare to break through the sentimentality and idealizations of our time to lay bare basic motivations.
Do you really lay bare our true motivations? Discover the roots of our behavior? That isn't discovery. It's ideology. Your materialist reductionism, scientism.
Your resistance is showing, Professor. Like others, you don't want to face up to the truth.
Is it my resistance or your persistence in trying to make your ideology look like science? Polymorphous perversity isn't a scientific discovery. It's a nasty opinion.
I am pointing to the biological root of motivation. That's the scientific basis.
That's so glib, Doctor. You're entitled to your point of view, but dressing it up as a scientific discovery, that's mistaken. Also, there's that larger issue of childhood perversity, the Oedipus complex.
Yes, that's the summit of my discoveries. What's your issue with it?
I can't grasp why you insist on the bizarre notion that boys want to kill their fathers. Such a sinister idea. You've got it backward, you know. If you have to find a dark motive in that relationship, it's likely the father's jealous of his son.
That's not intuitive. Look, the father is plainly the one to vanquish. He's the mother's consort and possessor. He takes her to his room at night. She sleeps with him.
No, Doctor. The father is decaying, crude, and smells of tobacco. The male child is young and sweet-smelling and vibrant. The child is her flesh, knows her, responds deeply to her. She is in love with him.
You haven't plumbed the depths of your psyche as I have, Professor. My mother was young, more than 10 years my father's junior. I adored her. I know I wanted her for my own.
Aren't you making my point? You adored your mother, but you were a toddler. You could hardly conceive of a program to possess her, to replace your father. But your father, he could see the light in her eyes. He could conceive of being displaced. He could be jealous.
Making my point, Professor. It's the child's projection of jealousy onto the father.
I'll admit a bias, Doctor. As I said earlier, 3 of my brothers committed suicide. Our dinner table was a ruthless round of inquisition, and I blame my father. I can't bear the suggestion that somehow their deaths were retribution for their own jealousy.
Your family knew a lot of tragedy, I know. Nothing I'm arguing here is criticism of your dead brothers.
Thank you for saying that. But to return to the matter of theory, you're entitled to your point of view, but dressing it up as scientific discovery, that's mistaken.
Mistaken? From where do you think our motivations arise? From philosophical deliberation, I guess.
No, Doctor. That's not my contention. But I will invoke my philosophy to this extent. On this issue, my philosophy is closer to the core of science, to look and observe rather than to assume. If we're going to talk about the basis of human motivation, we have to start by looking.
I am looking, and I see the causal foundation in biology. You see something else?
When I look at motivations, what I see is endlessly rich, diverse, and situational. Science selects for sameness. It wants to order things that are alike. It confines itself to things that have regular direct effects. It doesn't touch on how we live our lives. It can't fathom experiences that touch us deeply.
Psychology is the science of human behavior. It finds a great deal to categorize and order.
But not causes. Let me offer a simple example. If I kiss a photograph of my mother, where's the cause?
God, Professor, you're even more Oedipal than I thought. You wanted your mother. That desire is the cause.
You have to make something lewd of my gesture? All right, I'll let that pass. But looking at this gesture, where's this causal desire?
It's not conscious, Professor. You've repressed that. It's there nonetheless. So many of my patients have confirmed it of themselves, and by extension to you. But then, A Jesus figure like you might be different.
You're mocking me again. Look, even if every one of your patients endorsed that interpretation, all that it says is that they saw their desire in that light. There is no cause.
You spent so much of your life in an ivory tower. Desire causes much of life's mischief and mayhem.
I kiss my mother's picture because I love my mother. That reason explains my action. My reason isn't conjecture about some hidden cause. No one is waiting for the cause to be revealed. My reason is enough. There needs be no causal desire, even for making a pass at a woman.
Well, I know those were not your lusts, Professor. But don't speak for others. Desire is a powerful drive, a cause.
Let's keep my sexuality out of this. I want you to see that you're using a mechanical model. Cause, drive. We're not talking about machines. We're talking about human motives.
Oh, I hadn't realized where this was going. This is a reprise of talk you gave about my work. As I recall, you said it was an abominable mess. You said I confused causes with reasons. I have to say, Professor, I was not impressed. I guess I stepped on some philosophic toes. And some vanity.
Your theories make logical mistakes, serious mistakes. It was not about philosophers' vanity.
Perhaps not, Professor. If I can quote myself, I think it's the narcissism of small differences. You trumpeted these so-called logical mistakes, implying they caused confusion. Whose confusion, Professor? How many individuals have communicated effectively to millions of people who received a Nobel Prize nomination for literature? Where's the confusion, Professor? It's your confusion, your mind, addled by jealousy.
It's not jealousy at all. Are you afraid to consider my argument's merits? I appreciate that you wrote lucidly and that you have had a major social and intellectual impact. Still, that doesn't inoculate you from criticism.
Well, thank you for acknowledging my writing and its impact. All right, then. I'll return the compliment. Let's consider your criticism. So, I likened motives to causes. What's the matter with that?
The matter is that motives aren't causes. We have reasons for what we do. Instead, you're claiming that in the landscape of reasons, the real force remains unseen. The reasons we give are a charade. You contend the real workings of human intentions can only be seen from the standpoint of science? You assume you can mount some scientific height from which you can comprehend human choices as if they were balls on a billiard table.
So, do you oppose science? Science has climbed great heights of insight into the physical world. I look down on men's psyches from the balcony of science. I'm an apostle of science.
Be honest, Doctor. You dreamed up your early theories with that woman patient of yours while feeding her morphine addiction. Were you snorting cocaine at the time? No disinterested balcony there. Was that science?
That's a low blow. I'm willing to talk about my cocaine days, Professor, later. If you want to speak of early adventures, what fumes were you inhaling when you were an engineer and you designed an airplane engine that never left the ground? Wasn't it supposed to lift itself by snorting gases from the nostrils of its propellers?
Touché. But I want to return to your question. I don't oppose science. The perspectives science has discovered are obviously profound and effective. It's wonderful to have an overview in scientific matters.
I made fun of your airplane engine design, but I do give you credit for using science when it's needed. I love the story about you and the locomotive in that mountain Austrian town in the winter.
It's true. My scientific training made all the difference.
It's vivid. The cold winter, the black locomotive with its frozen pistons. The villagers have tried everything they can think of to restart it and failed. Someone says, Herr Wittgenstein claimed he was an engineer. Maybe he can help. Someone fetches you. You arrive, ponder the situation, and then announce, find all the men of the village and tell them to come and bring their hammers. Puzzled but obedient, the menfolk gather around you. You station them around the locomotive, declaring, I'm going to begin hammering. Hammer when I hammer and keep up with the rhythm of my blows. In a moment, the air is ringing with the sound. The rhythm gets faster, then slower, shifting in its timing until suddenly the locomotive begins to quiver. The great steel beast seems to awaken, shuddering under the blows. In the cab, they're furiously stoking the fire. The engineer releases a bolt of steam and the wheels begin to move. The pistons are free. Herr Wittgenstein has used resonance to force the steel thing into hot life. A throbbing penis. Did you ejaculate, Professor?
No, but I admit I was thrilled.
Your engineering background should make you more sympathetic to the claims of science.
I'm not immune to the allure of science and technology. I feel its power. You know, I like to go to the movies to see American westerns. I love Tom Mix. I feel the power wielding a six-shooter must have had. I think for many people, science is today's six-shooter.
What?
Science guns down the veil of appearances. Isn't that the allure?
You say you're sympathetic to science, but your example is a mockery.
Your Nobel Prize nominator saw, as I do, that your achievement was not in science, but in literature. Your insights are truly creative, sometimes compelling.
But
you claim an arbitrary authority over the nature of our intentions. But no matter how discerning your observations, they are never rungs to an overview of human behavior that has precedence over what we actually say about our choices and intentions.
You seem to be drawn to this ladder metaphor, Professor. You seem to dislike ladders. I recall you concluded the Tractatus saying of your propositions that anyone who has climbed out through them, on them, over them, must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up on it. Does anyone who reads you ultimately strand themselves on some perch?
I stranded myself. I was lured by the temptation to have a kind of superior oversight myself. The Tractatus was my logical edifice for some standpoint superior to ordinary language. I later realized I was wrong. There is no such standpoint. Ordinary language is inescapably strange and complex. It defies any reform or theory or scientific reduction.
What led you to abandon the Tractatus?
You recall in the dream, I have you showing scorn by making this gesture? Believe it or not, my friend Piero Sraffa, making that gesture, demolished a central tenet of the Tractatus.
How could he do that?
In the Tractatus, I developed a strict definition of language. According to my theory, language was logical, like a geometry system. It starts from a set of postulates from which the other rules of language can be derived. It's an absolute system.
So, what problem does that scornful gesture create?
There's no place in the system for any expression that is situational. If you're among Americans and perform the Sraffa's gesture, the reaction will likely be puzzlement. If you're among Italians, however, many are likely going to be insulted.
That's all it took to defeat your theory.
Yes. I saw that the ground of language isn't axioms. I've surrendered axioms. You could say I've been converted from being a logician to being an anthropologist, or maybe just a devotee of captivating pluralism of language.
It's hard to believe the Tractatus was ever taken seriously.
On the contrary, the Tractatus became a celebrated contribution to philosophy. An important group called the logical positivists adopted it as the central statement of their philosophy. They still do. They ignore my rejection of it.
I bet I could apply some analytic concepts to explain such dogmatism.
I have my own analysis. It's the craving for certainty and oversight. Logical systems in science both satisfy that craving. I was obviously drawn in by myself. I hinged philosophy to logic as you have hinged psychology to science. Indeed, are we all susceptible to such temptations?
As you said, with the Tractatus, you were lured by the temptation to have a kind of superior oversight. But for language, you're insisting, there's no way to fly to some commanding height.
Right. There is no commanding view. We are inside language. We are forced to walk. Regarding language, I've often been drawn to the metaphor of a labyrinth of paths, of a city's map. There are boulevards and blind alleys. As a philosopher, I want to help others avoid the blind alleys.
Such as?
The street named Essences. It's a seductive avenue for philosophers, an entry to seemingly higher ground. I understand the longing for transcendent ideas, for Platonic forms, but I was pretty effective at showing them as pointless excursions.
I can see it in my mind's eye. You standing at the corner of Essences in your philosopher's gown, waving off Plato's followers and other traffic.
Your forte is certainly imagination. Here, I'll add to it. I'm also waving off those science followers who madly believe their suburb is the secret manager of the whole city.
So, if not a logical or causal system, what is the foundation of the ability to use language?
Certainly not dictionaries delivered to babies' cribs. It's not instruction. It's our mothers bringing us into the community of language. It's their unceasing interaction with us.
Well, we both have theories about mothers, Professor. You should acknowledge the ways in which we are alike. Recognize, for one, that we are both democratizers. We both have, in different ways, legitimized the ordinary man.
Democratizers? Are you referring to my belief in every man's entitlement to his spiritual realizations, including mystical realizations?
No! I assign that belief to sentimental anarchy.
I'm no anarchist, Doctor. If anything, I'm conservative.
You're not so consistent. You were sometimes in thrall to that Aryan racist, Otto Weininger. Social class stereotypes are a short step away from his nasty prejudices. The upper class believes that ordinary people are primitive inferiors. You may be surprised, but you and I have shattered all that.
How have we done that?
The Oedipus complex knows no class distinction. It is universal. Even the son of an aristocrat lusts for his mother.
Well, I'm no psychoanalyst. How am I a democratizer?
I can't bestow the same measure of importance to you as to myself. But the same theme is there. You have shown that many of the distinctions of classical philosophy are precious nonsense. You emphasize ordinary language. You have taught philosophy and brought it down from Mount Olympus to the streets.
Thank you. I'll speak your importance, Doctor. It's hardly exaggeration to say you have changed how we speak today, how we understand one another.
I know I have changed modern consciousness. Your influence doesn't go that far, of course.
I'll go you one better in one respect, Doctor. You propose the elite authority of scientists regarding our motives. I declare the democracy, if you will, of everyday, ordinary expression, of the masterless pluralism of human intentions.
I would say that the ordinary expression you celebrate may mislead us from true self-understanding. My science corrects that.
I think your science creates an illusion of verifiable self-knowledge. The false standard makes for paralyzing suspicion. We are intimidated from believing our own intentions lest we be seen as self-deceiving.
Perhaps that's precisely the humility we need.
I hope you wouldn't call that sad result democratizing.
I strongly disagree that my science has that result, but I do agree we both are concerned with the language that emerges out of real human interaction.
Your talk of democratizing just now leads me to another claim. I said earlier that eating from the tree of speech made us human. Now I want to say again, that language made us gods. Gods is some way on par with God.
Aren't you carrying democracy too far?
Hear me out. Having language transformed us. We could create writing, art, music. These creations are completely ours. They are not subject to the determination of God's natural world. We determine them.
Humanity may determine its creations, but it's scientists like me that, in a godly way, understand them.
No, that's scientists' vain conceit. They think they have a God's eye view. They want to force a nature-like scheme on human creations. The truth is that human creativity is not obedient to science's natural laws. Scientists can observe creativity, but they will never have the means to predict the course it takes.
You won't deny then that as a celebrated observer of humankind, I share in godly creativity. I have created a unique language out of those observations.
Doctor, I'm not denying the uniqueness of your writing, but of course your language remains within our common language. You know, I'm famous for insisting that having a private language, a language of one's own, was impossible.
And I recall that you were also known for saying that if a lion could speak, we would not understand him. Maybe you don't share kinship with lions, Professor, but I do. I am a lion, and my oversight is kingly.
Not kingly, Doctor, just misguided. But I need a respite from this exchange.
Me too, Professor. But hear this. I'm pleased you're willing to leave the reading room and walk to my friend's apartment. It's certainly more comfortable here. My friend has provided some Brahms on the Victrola. I understand that Brahms was a frequent guest at your family's salon. Would you like a brandy?
No, thank you.
Well, I think I'll have a brandy. It will help me. The dear old carcinoma, as I affectionately call it. But it can't stop me from enjoying a brandy and a good cigar.
I've heard about your cancer. I'm very sorry. It's relentless, isn't it?
34 operations over the last 16 years, and a prosthetic jaw. Pain is my constant companion. But please, let's continue where we left off.
If you wish. Well, what I oppose is scientism. That's where we were tending.
I want to hear what you think.
Scientism is the idolatry of science. It holds that science alone is capable of describing all reality. Scientism wants to explain language and meaning, but it can't. Indeed, it holds that if we lack a scientific theory or something, we lack any understanding of it.
You characterize scientism as a kind of dogma.
I'm reminded of the familiar story of the elderly woman at a lecture on astronomy. During questions, she asserted, "What you've told us is rubbish. The world is really a flat plate supported on the back of a giant turtle." The lecturer asked what the turtle was standing on. She snapped, "Turtles. It's turtles all the way down." The scientific belief in causality has the same dogmatism. It's mechanistic causality all the way down. I think few people can give up belief in causal mechanism, regardless of the context.
Except special people like yourself.
I'm not claiming any special status. Science and technology are marvelous. It's not surprising they should have that hold on us that they do. But That adoration has become a fixed idea. Everything must submit to science.
Science is not fixed. It is a process of asking questions. How could that process be a mistake or be wrong?
Science claims all the facts of the material world. However, your scientism goes further. It claims to own human expression, its language, its intentions. It can't.
Why not?
As I said back in the reading room about gods, we determine language, not any process in the natural world. No theory borrowed from science can explain human expression. Questions about human expression do not have scientific answers, not because they are deep, impenetrable mysteries, but simply because they are not scientific questions.
I think you fail to appreciate my achievement. I have penetrated some of those deep, impenetrable mysteries you allude to.
Don't distort my words, Doctor. I said that human expression, unlike scientific questions, is not a mystery to be solved. But let me acknowledge that there is much in human expression that is mystical. The mystical sustains many of us.
What kind of distinction are you making?
Language is not part of the causal domain. We create it. There is no mysterious process behind it. Still, we humans have mystical experiences, mysteries, if you will, but toward which we do not seek explanation, so much as we embrace them as sources of meaning.
It sounds as if people are more willing to embrace groundless fantasy than grounded facts.
Science has seduced us into a demand for impossible groundedness. In the material world, every event is grounded by its cause. That ground is certain, and that certainty is reassuring. Our humanness is not tethered to causality. In it, we have mystical experiences and we have convictions. From the perspective of causality, they are groundless.
It's so strange to hear you defending groundlessness.
Isn't that the human predicament? And isn't it made worse by the allure of science? Having convictions, we are called to defend them, but we do so in the face of scientism. Even so, the harassment of the culture of scientism erodes moral confidence. Scientism demeans us.
That sounds too philosophical to me. Is there any practical consequence?
For me, yes. Who am I without my convictions? My convictions virtually define me. Scientism undercuts me, myself, who I am. That's not some philosophy or theory.
Your identification with your superego is laudable, Professor, but your self has other components, namely your ego, unconscious, and id.
Your psychological map is not my psychological territory, not me. That map is just a theory.
You seem to have a continuing complaint regarding my theories.
Let's go back to our exchange about infants, about kissing my mother's photograph. You said my kiss was sexually motivated. I said I thought your descriptions were tasteless. If we had continued, what would you have said next? What would you have said of a mother's love for her infant? I can imagine you would have likened it to a vanity, a narcissism, perhaps, right?
I think you may have some talent as a psychoanalyst.
I thought you would agree. Don't you see the enormity of that claim? You are not just expressing a preference for seeing a mother's love as narcissism. You're saying it's a fact. That crosses a line, defaming motherhood. Moreover, you're claiming that your concept should govern how we speak. Saying that mother's love is selfless is now forbidden. It's mistaken, wrong.
Mistaken? Wrong?
Aren't we obliged to be obedient to the facts? If such love is narcissism, if that's the fact, then say otherwise is wrong. Consider, in your world, anyone claiming to love someone should rather declare that some inward narcissistic process is informed in attachment.
Yes, we say cathexis.
So, it's not you or me who loves. It's this cathexis, seizing on an object.
Close enough.
So it would be mistaken even to use pronouns like you or I. You and I don't love. The process loves. Or more accurately, you, the cathexis, attaches. Saying you or I suggests some imaginary agent. You and I don't really exist. It's just the play of these cathexes and other processes.
You're exaggerating.
Am I? Doesn't your scientism bring an end to language as we know it? You don't draw out its implications, but they're inevitable.
People can say what they want. They may not be scientifically correct, but what they say is conventional and mostly harmless.
Are you backing away from the imperatives of science? Are you saying we should continue a language of delusion and superstition? I find that hard to believe.
Nothing escapes the penetration of science. How can language escape that?
As regards language, nothing is hidden. Language is public use, open to view. Language changes and expands, but its changes emerge from communal agreement. There's no hidden office creating language.
What is creating language?
Language is the expression of human consciousness, that living mystery. Its glory is that it's collectively unfolding. We are not mere readers of consciousness. We are its authors.
I think you're hiding from the power of causality.
Consciousness is unlike the usual objects of science. Consciousness exists only in the present. There is no repeatable process to control and examine. Declarations about drives and motives suggest something durable, but consciousness has no more physical substance than time itself.
Durable or not, I think you're failing to grasp that the human mind is a feature of material reality.
For scientism, the material world alone exists. Our minds barely have a place in it. Mind does not stand over nature observing it. Mind is some small spin-off of nature with pretentious imaginings.
I'm not arguing the relative importance of the human mind. I simply want you to face that consciousness is a product of the brain.
People want to see brains as these machines. People want to use the picture we have about machine processes as the picture for how the brain works and consequently how language works. It's a false idea.
Give me an example.
Let me say this first. It's false to regard thinking as the objective noticing of some brain process. If thinking were such an activity, every time we had a thought, there would be an impulse to say, oh, there it is. There it is one again.
That's absurd. What do you say?
Language is communication between human beings, not between brains. Scientism exploits the word mind as if it's a place where you can find thoughts. But it's just a verbalism, not a fact. Thoughts are no more in the mind than songs are in one's heart.
I think you're refusing to recognize what happens.
Look at how odd it is to compare seeing to a machine's activity. Consider a request to imagine a red flower. Do you think that before obeying, you must have conjured a red flower to serve as the pattern for the red flower you were told to imagine? A thought machine would require such a process, but seeing something does not. Seeing something does not consist in having an inner picture.
You're using an unsophisticated idea. Calculating machines, for example, are a useful parallel to the brain.
Interesting you should say that. One of my friends at Cambridge, Alan Turing, says there will someday be superfast calculators that will be ingeniously responsive. He said he is nearing the conviction that computable operations could be sufficient to embrace all mental functions performed by the brain. I found this very stimulating, disturbing. I had a daydream about it.
Tell me.
In the dream, people come to want their brains' workings to be more visible. They imagine their brains to be some Turing machine and want to display its output. So they had probes inserted in their brains to tap their contents and have the results displayed on screens. At first, all that could be shown were the colors corresponding to emotional states, and they danced around. Then people clamored for their thoughts to be shown as well, and it was a disaster. Spoken language ceased, all privacy was gone, and in its place on display were all the petty and sexual thoughts that we have. Cooperation was impossible, relationships were destroyed.
Amazing dream. Oh, I have a lot to say about it. Your daydream is a nightmare about science and technology. Not a realistic dream, of course.
Well, who knows what the juggernaut of technology will do to privacy?
That aside, your daydream suggests that scientism could destructively unleash repressed sexuality. But let's turn to reality. In reality, my work has beneficially unleashed that repressed sexuality.
Beneficially unleashed that repressed sexuality?
Psychoanalysis has given voice to the id and unconscious. Doing so has rescued civilization.
How?
Civilization is permanently opposed by sexuality. Victorian prudery had overreached. It pushed sexuality underground. The erotic lay in the unconscious, where it undermined honesty and relationships. I made sexuality public. And it was precisely my scientific orientation that made this exposure successful, a therapeutic rescue for our culture.
I think you're overreaching.
Don't you see? I diffused the danger of sexuality, showing that our erotic impulses could be scientifically understood tames them. It contains them in the impersonal structure of science. Like science, they can be talked about publicly.
I think many people would claim that you have unleashed a permissive promiscuity. Sexual libertarian behavior is rampant.
Not true. Such behavior was always present. Indeed, at the turn of the century, Vienna is estimated to have had as many as 30,000 prostitutes. That's not to speak of the many affairs among the wealthy clientele I served. I have made it possible to talk about sex. Psychoanalysis represents a conquest of sexuality. It's not salacious. It has forced open a public honesty in the place of private hypocrisy.
I gladly acknowledge you have had an enormous influence. Your writing has moved sexuality from the fringes to the center of much human dialogue.
So, along with philosophy, you find a place for me on the map of language.
There's no question of that. But such use is no confirmation of scientism.
There can be no retreat from scientific truth. I descended into the depths of my own unconscious to find truth. The meaning that humans espouse has its origins there, in the unconscious, the brain's primary process. You want to say that the language of meaning is public and open. I say that I am a discoverer of its hidden dynamics.
Hidden dynamics?
Neurosis, as an example. Neuroses are hidden motivations. Neurotics can't explain their behavior. They say and do things that are irrational. Obviously, they can't explain their behavior because it's caused. The fact of neurosis explodes all your fancy declarations about the openness of language and meaning.
I concede there is an apparent likeness between neuroses and causes. Indeed, some repetitious irrational behavior may be caused by some brain disorder. Depression, for example, may have a chemical basis for some people.
So you concede?
No. Doctor, the treatment, the talking therapy you have created, despite what you say, presumes that neuroses have reasons rather than causes. If neuroses were caused, they would be immune to your therapeutic insights. Only some other approach, chemical or surgical, would do.
So you're back now to the distinction between reasons and causes you covet so much.
It's not that I want to belabor that distinction, Doctor. I want you to see that cause, in your theories, aims at monopolizing the place reason has in our language.
Then what place for my theories do you allow in our language?
You saw that sexuality and its needs, in particular, give rise to reasons that we might more honestly acknowledge. You didn't go beneath language, you expanded it.
You still want to stress the public nature of language.
You made language that expanded its limits. I often said the limits of my language are the limits of my world. You enlarged those limits and enlarged human consciousness. You enlarged the world.
Now, that's a compliment I can accept.
I believe that, foremost, you are not a scientist. You're a writer, an artist. And as an artist, the destiny of your work is not anchored in science. It is released to public judgment.
You give and then take away.
I respect your interpretive creativity, unnerving as it is sometimes. I admire your expansion of language's motivation, even when I disagree. As an artist, you are entitled to the widest scope in play of language.
Scope, but not certainty. Is that it? An unnerving creativity.
I do think that many of your interpretations are perverse and sordid. I think they contribute to a cynicism regarding our motives. And the scientism you espouse, though I think it's unnecessary to your achievement, contributes to a degrading view of human beings. For example, you know I don't like your taste for language that stigmatizes children's impulses.
Is that prudery, Professor?
My objections are not prudish. Look, I know you collect statuettes of Egyptian gods. Perhaps you have one of Horus with an erect phallus ejaculating and collecting the semen in a bowl. I admire that Egyptians then regarded procreation with awe and reverence.
I don't have that statuette, Professor, but you make your point, and I interrupted you.
My daydream displayed the foolish aspirations of scientism. I don't believe my daydream reflected what science will do.
Seriously, what do you believe about the relation of the brain to consciousness and language? Surely you're not denying that the brain is behind it all.
It's plain to me that there is no process in the brain correlated exactly with thinking. Consequently, it would be impossible to read off thought processes from brain processes.
So, our brains can't be likened to a machine.
Right. There are theorists who believe that thoughts are encoded in the brain, almost like text in a book, and that someday there will be means to read them off. I think that's naive.
So you believe the neurons I discovered act in a more complex fashion?
Logically, it doesn't matter what the brain is up to. I once wrote that as far as the practice of language is concerned, the skull could be empty.
That sounds like some Buddhist notion, that the brain does not speak, consciousness just is.
Perhaps the Buddhists also know this. Consciousness cannot be logically equated with the brain's activity. Consciousness cannot be analyzed in terms of the purely physical.
You won't grant any role for the brain?
I've been making a logical point. I'm not irrational. Our brains are the physical basis of our consciousness. Of course, there are neural correlates to our actions and our intentions. However, since a neural correlate is hidden from us, it cannot be part of the meaning of an intention.
So, you don't disavow neurons. I was getting a little uneasy there. But you can't dismiss causality so easily.
Causality has limits. Science has already freed itself from mechanistic presuppositions in the form of quantum field theory. I'm no expert, of course, but quantum theory holds that at the fundamental level, events follow the laws of probability instead of the law of causation.
Clever point, but we don't function at that subatomic level. Our molecules move with the certainty of gravity.
We're both exposing our ignorance. Yet, I did read that James Jeans, a major subatomic physicist, asserted that the motions of electrons and atoms do not resemble the movement of the parts of a locomotive so much as those of the dancers in a cotillion.
You must have smiled at the reference to a locomotive.
I did. It remains a nice memory. Notice, subatomic physics changes our metaphors. I'll grant that this physics is still young and has not yet much influenced scientism. Nonetheless, scientism now adores an obsolete God.
You know, as my frailty deepens, I feel more and more obsolete. Still, I recently wrote a friend that human beings, me included, have become prosthetic gods. Look at what science and technology have made for us, and to us. When I put on my auxiliary organs, from my jaw prosthesis to my motor car, I am truly awesome, even though the prosthesis still gives me constant trouble.
Doctor, perhaps this is all too much stress. We can stop.
No, Professor. I'm fascinated by you and your thoughts. Besides, I love this Oedipal struggle with you. You defeated Russell, but I'm not ready to give up.
Then we'll continue. Perhaps you can claim some credit for using the metaphors of science to tame the erotic of our culture. But at the same time, your scientism has been destructive.
How?
As I said earlier, psychoanalysis has sullied the innocence of childhood. And there's more.
Go on.
Look at this, Doctor. Your theory highlights unconscious motives. It says why we do something isn't always the whole story. That insight combined with your idea that our motives are caused leads to self-doubt, a distrust of oneself. People are now beset with the question, am I really sincere, even when I think I am?
I don't doubt your sincerity, Professor. Is that all?
Your theories assault what it means to have a conscience. You propose that conscience is no more than a fear-ridden response to the Oedipal struggle. You erase the nobility of conscience and its convictions. Your scientism is cynical. Scientism's mechanistic explanations are inevitably cynical.
Where, then, should we look for the basis of conscience and its convictions, if not in science?
As I said, at our mother's knees. Also in the playground. Also as adults, recognizing our responsibilities. Also in the awe of what it means to be human.
Awe.
Your theories leave no room for awe. Knowing awe requires a not knowing. There's no room for awe if everything can be explained and deconstructed. Man has to reawaken to awe and wonder, and science sends us to sleep again.
To sleep again? You think we should dwell in fantasies instead?
Science gives us an abstract and impersonal worldview. One physicist uses the words chilling impersonality to describe the worldview of science.
That's one physicist, Professor. Other scientists and physicists have a different view. For them, science is the most bountiful source of awe.
That's surprising.
Not at all. For many scientists, for many people, science is a source of awe and even reverence. Because every advance in knowledge brings us face to face with the profound depths of the world around us.
For me, the really profound depths transcend science. That the world, the universe exists, is mystical. Just that it exists. Just that awareness, the sheer wonder of it, empty of investigation, leaves me in awe.
Your attitude is so one-sided. Science, no less than philosophy, represents the love of truth. The love of truth, Professor. Is that not deep enough a source of awe?
Not if the truth's funneled through some methodology. For me, truth is not bounded by rational thinking. I'm not a religious person, but for me, there is also truth in religion and mythology.
For me, to be religious is to be sick by definition. It is the effort to find a cure where none can possibly exist.
Your attitude is the one-sided, but I'll go this far with you. The all we know can, at times, slide into fear. The vastness of creation. Do we really matter? Does your science protect us from that terror?
Yes! Knowing that such fear is a neurotic regression is the successful defense.
I find more respite in a religious response. I'm no Lutheran, but I'm moved more by Luther's seeing Jesus as the response to that terror. Jesus coming to earth was the undeniable assurance that we matter. I can feel the heart in that. Even before scientism, we humans knew the chill of fearing our existence is pointless.
I don't doubt that I matter, and I don't need religion to justify existence. Do you really want to celebrate an imaginary mystery?
Yes. I celebrate the religions that know mystery and see it everywhere. Once nature seemed inexplicable, without nymphs in the brooks and dryads in the trees.
And a god enthroned in the clouds, a baseless projection. Religions, as I see them, are a hodgepodge of unverified beliefs, superstitious rituals, and peculiar eating habits.
You want to fragment religions, analyze them for their verifiable parts? It's wrong. Any religion is a form of life, a sacred whole for its adherents, a way of living. It's wrong to dissect devotion.
So take it or leave it. Is that your stance? Religion should be more humble in its entitlement. Where's doubt about God?
Isn't it science that projects inviolable godlike causes behind every human endeavor? Religion at least acknowledges that we humans are free agents, the accountable source of what we say and do.
Science beholds a nature that is explicable, subject to the facts.
Religion is not about facts. Religion is different. Even in comparison with the creative arts, it is the furthest removed from fact-centeredness. Religion is first about the uncanniness of being in the world. The sense of the sacred is about the embrace of being a human being within a profound mystery.
Science has its own relation to mystery, but mystery that can be conquered.
Mystery, if it exists for science, has retreated to the subjects of cosmology and subatomic physics. And there, only experts have comprehension. The more that is discovered, the less it seems to have to do with any sense we have of things. Science has swallowed mystery.
The contrary. Physics today makes an appeal to the imagination of ordinary people. In that way, it, to some extent, satisfies the metaphysical hunger which religion does not seem capable of satisfying nowadays.
It's double-edged. Science has shattered our perception of physical reality. Paradoxically, science may even shatter its certainties about awe and the spiritual realm.
You're blinding yourself to the magnificence of reality that science is unfolding. There's awesome inspiration, for example, from knowing of the far-flung galaxies to comprehending the cotillion dance of subatomic particles you mentioned. And no need for a god to dance with.
It's true that a religious man is engaged in a different language practice than an atheist. It has its own grammar. It's a passionate commitment to a way of living, a way of assessing life. I have to confess I joined the religious man in the desire for blessedness.
You and I speak a different language. I know you find my rationalism too severe, even aseptic.
I wonder how aseptic you really are. I've heard that when you were in Rome, you visited Michelangelo's statue of Moses every day for weeks. Was there some religious calling in those visits?
Odd you should bring up Moses. Our conversation began with the importance of some of his words for you. For me, he is also one of those protean figures, one who led us out of the shadows. Sitting with that statue day after day helped develop my theories.
You won't acknowledge anything more.
I had moments of deep feeling, of course. Sorry, no oceanic experience, Professor. Trying to find some inconsistency in me, are you?
Perhaps.
Well, let's look at you. Aren't you dogmatic in your theorizing?
For me, scientism is what is dogmatic. My mentor, Bertrand Russell, is captive to it. He believes that philosophy is a science. He thinks that philosophy makes hypotheses that are successive approximations of truth.
Yes, Russell is correct. Philosophy is a set of theories awaiting confirmation.
That's a difference between us. I have no theory. Indeed, the thrust of my work has been to defeat theory, any theory or doctrine that would explain language.
Oh, yes, I recall. Your Italian friend rescued you from your theory-making with just a gesture.
It was as if I were wearing a pair of glasses that continually distorted my vision. I had to take them off.
It's more like he shattered them for you.
He did shatter my insistence on sharp clarity. I saw that there's no systemizing human expression. I realized that what is human breaks from the causal structure of explanation. There are no hidden principles, nothing concealed to expose.
Yes. That's your opposition to scientism. That may not be a theory, but it is certainly a firm point of view. You have sympathy for the religious. What is your sympathy for those who adhere to scientism?
I don't underestimate the hold scientism has on most people. I believe I am writing philosophy for a future time when the hold of scientism on people will have weakened, when they will dare to remove their scientistic glasses.
What will motivate them to do that?
Seeing its danger, for one. If the world is a preordained mechanism, a domain of efficient causation without meaning, then why not just amorally pursue our own interests? Crass self-interest rules.
I'm hearing your fears of cynicism again. And what will weaken cynicism?
A change in temperaments, for one. I would say we are beset with opposing psychological temptations. Scientism obviously reflects our desire for mastery. It also seems to reflect a desire for submission. If all is preordained, we are relieved of the burdens of choice, of life-making.
That's a suggestive interpretation, Professor. It reminds me of my theory of the opposition of the primal instincts, eros, and the regressive death drive.
Instincts are fixed, aren't they? I would rather see scientism as a current temperament, a temperament that can change.
A change in temperament. Isn't that a polite euphemism? I think what you actually believe is that we are intoxicated with certainty, that we are addicts.
Addiction is certainly relevant. Science has fed that addiction to certainty. But I also believe that the tendency is very old. Philosophy, that old endeavor, certainly also manifests a keen desire for detached analysis, for certainty.
I'm reminded of your claim that your ideas regarding language have brought an end to philosophy, that whole tradition.
As philosophers, we can only describe, not find final answers. True philosophy is crisscrossing over the question that interests us, like conversation. There's drama, even poetry, in such an exchange. I hope if someone wants to reproduce my philosophy method someday, they do it as a stage play.
Philosophy is not the only activity that can be likened to the theater. Science is also a stage. It is on the stage of science that the true character of nature is revealed. Human beings are part of that nature that is revealed.
You are wrong. Human beings are on that stage, but they are apart from nature. Nature is causally scripted. We are not. Nature has no intentions. We do.
So, are you a playwright or a philosopher?
I don't think of myself as a philosopher. I just want to be a thinking man.
And apparently a philosopher, a playwright, or a man without a firm set of absolutes.
What's persuasive in philosophy can't be absolute. I like the metaphor of being a fly trying to find its way out of a bottle. Each of us is different. A particular argument will not help every fly. What happens to work for me doesn't work for someone else. Indeed, what works for me now may not work for me tomorrow.
No eurekas for you. So, what is the dumb fly butting up against?
Here's a significant bottle. That our convictions and values can be explained. Try to explain them cannot succeed.
Do you have in mind a value like goodness, an explanation of why one should be good?
Yes. Both philosophy and science tend to want the coercive power of an absolute judge or justification. For me, the so-called real explanations for the goodness are so much drivel.
Of course one can explain why one should be good. One reason is that being good promotes happiness. What's wrong with that?
There is certainly often some connection between goodness and happiness, but happiness utterly fails as the reason to be good. A person may be faithful to a conviction to be good regardless of the happiness it may or may not produce. Every explanation fails like that.
So, let me guess a reason that won't fail. What is good is what God commands.
You know I'm not invoking God. Remember Moses. I believe that our sense of the good is already in our mouths and hearts. I just want to cut off the explanations.
But Professor, in the real world, we do give reasons for what convictions we act on.
Of course we do. I'm just contending that at some point explanation must stop. If I have exhausted the justifications meaningful to me, I have reached bedrock. Then I am inclined to say, this is simply what I do. I'm insulted by more demands of an explanation.
I thought your philosophic work didn't focus on values and morality.
You know, the only public lecture I ever gave was on morality. In that lecture, I said that morality lies outside the world of facts. A fact may be the product of a cause. Facts can be accounted for. Morality is different. There can be no science about it. Any attempt to say anything science-like about morality would be nonsense.
What do you mean, nonsense? What's so sacrosanct about ethics and morality?
You've used the right word, sacrosanct. Morality is sacred. It is inviolable. Any attempt to explain morality runs up against the boundaries of language. Not that people don't try to say what morality really is, but our world stops at the boundary of morality. Running up against that limit is absolutely hopeless. There is no science, anything that can take us beyond that limit. Morality is not a fact. In that sense, it is not part of our world.
Well, that was a mouthful. Do you say all that out of some religious obligation, some dogma?
No, it's an observation about the limits of language. Notice that people who are seduced by science will say of moral convictions that they are merely preferences. They say that because no morality has universal adoption. Any morality can be no more than a preference.
How can you argue against the social conditioning of moral values? It's simple sociology.
Simple sociology. That's what intimidates most people. Yet in having convictions, as we must, we're insulted. We must resist that trivializing of our convictions. We may not quite know how to resist because at those moments we have reached language's limits.
Ah, for the moment I missed the connection between all this and your oft-quoted declaration, what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence.
Writing that was a bit oracular, but it does represent both my view of nature's language's limits and reverence for it. When I wrote that, I was thinking specifically of moral convictions. However, in truth, it applies to everything that is meaningful, including the ways of love, empathy, and friendship. For all of these matters, ultimate justifications are futile.
So, this is the way you want to support convictions. It seems brittle to me, a kind of logical righteousness. I'm beginning to see your game, Professor. It's your fretful preoccupation that meaning is under assault. You want to protect meaning with nostalgia and logical ploys.
There's nothing brittle about convictions. They're only brittle if you suppose they have to be verified by science. But there's no such need. Convictions are not in a holding area awaiting scientific confirmation. They are alive and well already.
I'm glad for them. Simply as convictions, are they really under assault?
Aren't they under assault? Don't most people feel shaky? Look at the intention to be altruistic. Scientism has created a dire suspicion of altruism, that it must be some kind of self-interest. Doctor, name a person you know who would openly claim to have been altruistic.
Such suspicion has a basis. Neurobiology shows that our intentions can ultimately be reduced to our genes seeking their survival and propagation.
Yes, it's that cynicism that we've come to. Let me add to my question. How many who have had a mystical experience freely acknowledge their experience?
We're back to mysticism. I thought you might be avoiding it. It's one thing to defend the inviolability of the good, another to defend the mystical. That's a bigger reach.
Like your daring expansion of language, mystical experiences may be seen as a reach. You said you descended into the depths of unconscious experience. Mystical experiences are usually more like ascents into the heavens.
And both are threatening, wouldn't you say? Fear of depths and fear of heights?
Perhaps unsettling, but not threatening. A mystical experience is likely to be received as precious, with an imperative to protect it. An imperative like we have with moral convictions.
You're making a lot of such experiences.
Such experiences transcend our usual understanding. Perhaps they are silent empathy with the cosmos. Or, who knows, roaring eruptions from one's own deep consciousness. They are transfiguring.
In contrast to my roars. You are contrasting the mystical realm to my revelations of the unconscious.
I would say both take us to the limits of language, to the limits of a world. A mystical experience both changes nothing and changes everything.
I would say such talk makes mystical experiences suspect.
After my mystical realization, outwardly my life was unchanged. But inwardly, I knew at a deep level my soul was secure. It enabled me to volunteer as a common soldier in the war.
That connection eludes me.
The imperatives of values and mystical experiences can seem to touch us from a different sphere, intimations of the divine. Nonetheless, it is in such imperatives in ordinary life that we amazingly find ourselves and, indeed, each other.
Find each other.
Doctor, I'll give you an insight into my life and work. I can see that much of it is concerned with opposing the idea that we are hidden from each other, that ultimately we are trapped by the privacy of our experience from ever really finding each other.
I think I know the philosophical term for your fear. Solipsism. The solipsist believes that nothing exists except himself. If I were a solipsist, you would simply be a phantom in my ongoing dream.
Solipsism is a caricature of my fear. but I do believe scientism pushes us towards something like it.
How does scientism do that?
Don't you see? If our minds are just some kind of machine in our skulls, our thoughts are just processes hidden in a bony encasement, we are truly phantoms to one another.
What's the alternative?
Now, there's no need for such a conception. We live inside language, public language. There's no need to seek out hidden private processes.
I can feel the urgency this has for you.
I think we're being seduced by scientific explanation, but I'm sure we also fear it. Science is deterministic. We fear that we are puppets, marionettes controlled by the strings of hidden processes. Don't you feel it?
I feel your desire to cut the strings. You want to be a real boy.
I do want for myself and everyone that we be acknowledged as persons. I reject the reductionisms of science and the prevailing political ideologies. We are not objects.
Science is not our enemy, Professor.
I ask you, aren't we all ambivalent about science? Don't we all fear that it will take away our sense of being the authors of our lives?
Nothing challenges my authorship of my life.
Don't you see? If all is determined, all our expressed intentions are simply rationalizations about what would happen anyway?
I think you're still pondering your daydream.
Yes, in a way. If human discourse is akin to automata, readings of scripts, there is nothing that can bring us face to face. Our kinship, our intimacy arises of sharing spoken values, convictions, and deep, unpredictable realizations.
Silence and kinship. Such themes. That reminds me of something you would find interesting.
What is it?
Silence is, of course, how a psychoanalysis begins. The analyst sits silently so that the patient can engage in free associations. Of course, the analyst eventually responds, but there must be some rapport the two of them feel during that silence.
Some feeling of kinship.
Yes. A few young psychoanalysts are writing about empathy. They say that what is truly therapeutic is the empathy the analyst has for the patient, the empathy more than the insights. Empathy is a relatively new word. It doesn't appear in the English editions of my writing.
So, you're relating empathy to kinship in silence. That's an empathetic connection to what I'm saying, Doctor. Thank you.
What I have stressed is to maintain a suspended, even hovering attention. Of course, it's a process, a path that leads from identification by way of imitation to find one's way into another's experience. That's how I would define empathy.
It sounds like a pretty roundabout path to a sense of empathy.
The analyst has to allow himself a limited regression in order to achieve it. But yes, it's a trained skill.
Sounds contrived. You're talking about silently listening to someone. Does it have to be taken apart like that? Does it have to be a technique?
Of course. Psychoanalysis is a technique.
I think you failed to appreciate the unknowable dimensions of silence and empathy.
Oh, they're not a mystery. Out of the silence, the patient begins to project his neurotic relationships onto the analyst. In this transference, the patient imagines the analyst has feelings and opinions that a mother or father had for him or her.
Silence is not simply an absence of sound, nor is it just a stage for projection, as you call it. I think it can be a source of the ineffable, especially regarding convictions and values. Sometimes we don't fill silence. It fills us.
That's poetic, Professor. But I'm talking about a therapy, helping people heal.
Perhaps in psychoanalysis it is some kind of tool, but empathy, as most people understand it, is not a tool.
What is it then?
Empathy is a human response. Heaven knows I'm no exemplar, but I hear young people talking about it. Empathy is how they say they relate to one another. I've been quite moved. These young people would be offended if they were said to be using a tool, manipulating each other.
There's no such thing as just a human response. All relationships are enactments and manipulations. You haven't forgotten how you chided me about the two types, narcissistic and anaclitic. All relationships either mirror our egotism or enact a leaning back to an earlier relationship.
I don't accept that. Moreover, I don't think you appreciate what your legacy may be.
How does that go?
You are the father of psychotherapy. I would not be surprised if you have launched a movement for empathetic listening. You may regard it as simply a technique, but in my sense, it's that empathy has a life of its own.
Come now, Professor. You're fantasizing.
Actually, I'm understating. For me, that sense of kinship, of intimacy that emerges out of listening has the character of the sacred.
That's a leap.
Yes, sacred, holy. Imagine being graced with a sense of seeing the other, and reciprocally, a sense of being seen.
Put that way reminds me of your daydream. Perhaps the real fruit of empathy will be that people seeing each other more deeply will allow intimate disclosure without destruction of relationships.
Wouldn't that be grand? You've transformed my nightmare into a lofty vision, the blessing of deeply seeing each other.
The psychoanalytic patients who have been cured of their neurosis often have a conviction that their analyst has seen them and cured them. It borders on a conversion experience.
Recall the epiphany I had that whatever happened to me, I am safe, absolutely safe? It was a mystical experience. Anyone who has had such an experience say that it defies expression, that no conclusive description of it can be given in words. Some say it is a breaking through the veil of ordinary consciousness.
I think you had a conversion experience.
There are many kinds of mystical experiences. Some might be conversion experiences, but certainly not all.
So what's their essence?
There's no essence. I would say that they are almost always experienced as a gift, something received without having earned it.
So who's the giver?
The origin of the gift is a profound matter. People have different interpretations. What is striking is the clarity that one did not make the experience, fashion it oneself.
If not oneself, then from where?
The matter of source and identity is mystical. For some, there is the experience of loss of identity. For others, a sense of oceanic identity, to use your phrase. For some, the source feels interior, and for others, from outside, some electric contact. Some would say God.
So many objects of projection.
So many cherished sources of reverence. For many, like myself, these mystical experiences are a beacon for the rest of one's life. They highlight and deepen life's meaning.
You speak like what are called seekers.
Perhaps I am. I'm talking about extraordinary experiences. I have no dogma, not even answers. I'm simply advocating for mysticism, realizations that perhaps half of us have.
I've treated seekers like you, Professor. They invariably talk about their consciousness.
Consciousness has aims we can't so easily contain. It reaches for the spiritual as ardently as it reaches for the material.
So even philosophy can't convey the aims of consciousness.
Sadly, philosophy's usual contribution is the bewitchment of our intelligence. My hope lies in simple observation of what consciousness reveals.
What consciousness reveals?
What is consciousness? No one can say. We are composed of physical matter, inert stuff, yet we have consciousness. How can that be?
It's all too easy to mythologize.
Should we regard consciousness as something which, unfortunately, has to be admitted, but is something of an embarrassment to our understanding?
No. Our comprehension of the brain and its functioning continues to expand.
So then, let's, for argument, grant that as a physical machine, the brain has acted according to the unbreakable laws of physics. So then, why be embarrassed by what consciousness produces? Why the assumption that its spiritual behavior must be discredited?
That product of consciousness has no basis in actuality.
What is real for physicists is up for grabs. Ironically, in the new physics, actuality has disappeared. The mystical experiences people have may be glimpses of a reality transcending the narrow limits of our particular consciousness. Who knows what our consciousness in the future may comprehend?
I don't want to struggle more with you, Professor. This has been vigorous and revealing. Actually, I'm touched by your appreciation of my work, of me. You are truly a kind of saint.
I've tried to live a life of virtue, but I know I've failed. I'm no saint.
It's true that despite your intentions, you have often been rude and even cruel. And I have to say, even today.
What are you talking about?
Up at Cambridge today, I spoke to a student. I think his name was Freeman Dyson. He said he occupies the room beneath yours, and finally today mounted the courage to speak to you. Your response was to dismiss him. You even asked him if he was some damn journalist.
Yes, I did do that. It was rude.
You seem to have Jesus as your role model. Moses is mine. Neither of us seems to have been apt followers. You're no sweet Jesus. I may have wanted to lead mankind out of a psychic slavery, but the truth is, I mostly have made slaves of my followers to my cult.
Though small, I have a cult as well. In the period that I abandoned philosophy to teach in a rural school, I urged my students to leave Cambridge and do useful manual work. Some did leave. One, Francis, who is also my lover, became a factory mechanic. Russell accused me of squandering their lives. I regret my indifference to those that loved me, and I am haunted by the blows on the school children I struck.
Let's not be formal, Wittgenstein. I'm sure I have worse sins. I was unfaithful to Martha, my wife, with her sister, Minna. I led my close friend Ernst into a fatal cocaine addiction. You may find fault with my science, but truthfully, my major faults are elsewhere. I have left a trail of people I have hurt, used, betrayed. I recall one of my disciples whose suicide was certainly related to how I crushed him. Well, I didn't expect to find myself making confessions. Indeed, I've never had a confessor, Wittgenstein. Can you accept being that for me now?
Of course, Freud. If I were a priest or a rabbi, I would offer you forgiveness. I'd ask the same.
Certainly. And thank you. Thank you, Wittgenstein. And for you, while we're confessing, what about your homosexuality? Is that a moral struggle?
It's that and more. I realize now that I didn't share my whole dream with you and why you are a villain in it. In my dream, I lose my sexual innocence at my brother's knees. My older brother, Hans, takes it. If it's true, his later suicide was probably related. My perpetual shame is probably my price. I think for me, both you and Hans are the destroyers of innocence.
Wittgenstein. How I wish you could be my patient. I believe we could achieve much redemptive healing. This has been a wonderful exchange, but it will be our last.
Why? What are you saying?
I'm ending my life.
Ending your life?
The cancer is winning. You've kindly not mentioned it, but you've obviously been enduring the stench of it. I'm dying, Wittgenstein. I have already arranged my death with my physician. I didn't say, but this is his apartment. He is meeting me here soon.
You're going to commit suicide?
Yes.
No guilt. I'm not religious, but
no
still.
guilt, Wittgenstein. It's my life. I don't question my right to end it.
Despite your suffering, you still have life. You can still behold this world.
Behold this world. Wittgenstein, this world is about to descend into an abyss of slaughter. I'm glad to miss that.
Regardless of the world, what about you? Inwardly, no fear?
I don't believe I am absolutely safe like you, Wittgenstein. Is that what you're looking for? Are you asking if I have a conception like you?
It's not a conception for me. It's a realization, a mystical realization.
I don't have, or want, such a realization, such a consolation. How can you believe it?
It happened. It took hold of me. It's mine, but not mine. I did not create it. I hope my humility before it counts for its truth.
You and I are very different. Your humility has no allure for me, and I have misled you.
How?
I once confessed to my friend Fleiss that I am actually not at all a man of science, not an observer, not an experimenter, not a thinker. I am by temperament nothing but a conquistador, an adventurer. My aim has been successful exploits and fame. Guile and ambition have guided me.
I suppose there's some humility in that confession, Freud.
In a way, I am an example of the solipsism you challenge. My Oedipal theory didn't draw from observation. It was the projection of my autobiography. My theoretical empire is me, writ large. The consciousness I have created is a mirror of me and will transcend time. I am a triumphant solipsist.
What are you saying? That you have triumphed over mortality, over death?
Yes, in a way. I am a solipsistic conquistador. My vanity contends that I have subsumed all of us within my psychological boundary.
That's grandiose, of course, but then who knows what our boundaries are? What we may be after death? What existence our souls may have? As a great Indian sage said, "Because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well." Must we fear death? Must it be a defeat?
I don't accept defeat. Certainly not the pain I endure. I am about to defeat this pain with my will, with a quantity of morphine. That will be part of my victory.
Victory. So in a way, you do see yourself as safe, after all.
Only safe from defeat. Nothing public about it. It's my private victory. And I anticipate no afterlife in which to celebrate it.
Freud, come with me. You have this private victory meaningful to you. Isn't it like my revelation? Isn't it like the revelations many here have known? Isn't it a similar inpouring of meaning that enriches our souls?
I'm not ready for this much intimacy, Wittgenstein.
I'm not certain I am either, Freud. But I feel in my heart that we are all safe, that we are all inviolable.
I can't contend with your heartfelt feelings, Wittgenstein. I honor your sincerity.
I celebrate your victory, Freud. Even though we have just met, I do see you as a friend. I will grieve your death. I will miss you.
I think empathy has been the victor here, Wittgenstein. Even in this short time, we have been finding each other. As much as I regret it, it's time for us to part.
Yes, of course.
Let me call a taxicab for you.
It's our turn.